Okay.
You can just, I guess, pass it around so people might names and stuff.
Okay.
Just that way we know the attendance. And do you have any PAs with you?
No.
No? And
No.
you got your lunch tickets taken care of?
Yeah, I've got it in my bag.
Cool.
That does what I want. All right. You guys want to start passing this around? Just mark your name off. Just put a check next to your name. Pass it around.
Do you have any handouts to give out?
Nope.
No? Okay, you're good.
Yep. As minimal as possible.
It'll come back, I'm sure.
We'll hunt down your pin for you. We will find it. I wouldn't want you to be pinless.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. Sorry it's so early, but I had no control over that. 9 o'clock is awfully early to start a really fast guide to Django. But this is all being recorded, and I've given you a book, so hold on. First of all, this is Getting Started with Django, a crash course. If you don't care about Django, you're in the wrong room. Secondly, hi, I'm Kenneth Love, as you probably all knew when you signed up. I did and still do the website Getting Started with Django. There should be a .com on there, but logos don't look good with .coms. I also do corporate training with New Circle, which is why I'm wearing their snazzy t-shirt today. And actually, just this past week signed on, I am going to be the Python and Django instructor for Treehouse. So if you know Treehouse for learning HTML, JavaScript, Ruby, stuff like that, they're now going for the first time to offer a real actual Python course and Django course. So that's going to be me. So you probably want to put in one of these two URLs. The top one gives you an HTML version of all the stuff I'm going to talk about today. And the bottom one gives you a really hastily made PDF version of all the things I'm going to talk about today. I'm probably going to be going a little fast, and I'm going to be jumping back and forth between a couple of things. So that's why I'm giving you written guides. You may have trouble following along, typing everything in. That's okay. It's all being recorded. You can look it over again later, right? I'll leave this up for a minute. Anybody here never touched Django before? All right. You're going to get a real thrill today then. If what I'm saying heavily confuses you, I recommend checking out the actual Django tutorial on djangoproject.com and, of course, getting started with Django.com. I'll do my best to answer any questions and explain things as I go along. All right, everybody got one of the two guides ready? Panic now or forever hold your peace.
Hold on.
All right, that's a good panic. Sorry, that first URL is insanely long. I couldn't get read the docs to shorten it any further. Everybody good now? Seeing people looking at screens, so you're probably okay. So this is what I'm assuming that you have, and this is what I have, so you know this will work. We're going to be working in Python 2.7. I know we should probably be working in 3, but Git, mainly because I like Git, and also because Heroku expects Git. And we're going to be deploying on Heroku, which means we have to have a Heroku account. I say we're going to be deploying. We're going to do our best to deploy today. And the Heroku toolbelt installed, which you can get from, I do believe, toolbelt.heroku.com. Again, if you don't have this stuff right now, it's okay. Just letting you know kind of what the tutorial expects. And then, of course, you need a way to edit files because it's hard to program without being able to change what's in a file. All right, so let's go. All right, first things first. We've got our terminal. And I'm just hanging out in my sites folder, but I'm going to make myself a PyCon folder just because I want to keep everything together. How many of you have not used virtual env or virtual env wrapper before? Anybody? A couple people? Okay. So what virtual env and virtual env wrapper do is normally Python installs everything to your site packages folder, this one folder on your computer. So every Python thing that you use uses these same libraries. This is great if you never upgrade anything ever, or you upgrade all your projects at the same time. What virtual env does is it gives you a way to have a self-contained, easily disposable set of packages. So I can say, okay, this project is going to use Django 1.5, and then my next project is going to use Django 1.6, and then I'm going to go crazy and build one off the Git master, and they're all going to work because they're all in their own virtual environments. They're not going to conflict with each other. Virtual env wrapper goes around virtual env and basically just gives me this really nice command of mk virtual env, which just makes a virtual environment for me. I don't have to go through the steps of telling virtual env where to make one and where to put it. And so I'll call this one, All right, so it creates some stuff for me, and you notice that now my prompt has changed next to my heart, because my last name is Love, so I have a heart. Now it says GSWDCC. All right, so that said, now if I do, like, say, which Python, you notice it's one inside this virtual envs folder. It's not my global Python, which is good. That's what I want. I don't want my global Python. Sorry, just trying to get something up over here real quick. Ah, there it is. Okay. All right. So now that we have this virtual env, we need to install some things to it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to install Django, because this is all about Django, right? And for those of you that haven't used virtual env before, or even if you haven't used this part of pip, you can tell pip which version of something to install with a double equal sign, or you can do greater than, less than, stuff like that. We specifically want 1.6.2, so that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to have Django start a project for us, and we're going to call this Survival Guide, because what we're going to make today is something handy for all of you as you go to PyCon. We're going to make a thing where you can make lists of the talks you want to go to, and then rate them and review them and put notes on them, stuff like that. So handy little guide for PyCon. All right, so if I look, I now have this Survival Guide directory, which just has manage.py in it, and another directory called Survival Guide. This is one of the weird little things with Django, is whenever I make a project, I get a folder with that project name, and then inside that folder, I get another folder with that same project name. You get used to it. But the one that's inside is kind of just our little project stub. It's where all of our settings and stuff are going to live. Before we get to those, though, we do want to make sure this whole thing is inside of Git. So we'll make a Git init. And then as we want to not have PYC files and we don't want our database, we'll make our get ignore file real quick. Let's see if I can do this. Let's see if that'll be enough room. So that way you'll be able to see text files and other stuff at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about the database. For what I'm going to build for the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to bother setting up Postgres and an actual database connection. We're just going to use SQLite. Don't use SQLite most of the time. All right? It's a excuse me. It's a great database for just testing something out, for building something really quickly, like we're going to do today. Something I'm going to build in 3 hours. It's a really bad database to use for something that you're actually going to deploy somewhere if you care about the data that you're putting into it. It doesn't have a whole lot of type checking and stuff, so you can stick integers into variable character fields and vice versa. You can stick integers into Boolean fields. Like, it really doesn't care. But today we're just going to use this. We will be using Postgres when we go to Heroku. But just for right now, we're not doing that. So we have this manage.py file. And manage.py is our access to basically everything that's inside of Django. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to tell it to sync our database. And you can see this creates a whole bunch of tables. There we go, that's a little better. And then asks us if we want to create a super user. And of course we do. Apparently I can't type this morning. Haha. And so now if we look, we have a database file right there. And if I popped into the SQLite shell, I could open that file up and browse the table, stuff like that. So one more thing we need to do before we can kind of start seeing stuff, a couple little things, is inside of the survival guide directory, we have a settings file. So we need to open that. So let's actually just open up this whole directory. And inside settings, we don't care about any of this stuff right now. We need to add a new variable down here called template ders. And so Django by default looks for templates inside each application. We'll get to apps in a moment. But if you want global templates that apply to the entire site, not to a specific app, typically you want to put them into a folder that's not part of a specific app, right? So we're going to tell Django that we're going to do that. Django 1.6 finally started supplying us with this variable called basedir, which is really nice and handy. Previous versions of Django didn't provide that. You had to set up like a lambda to find the file path you were on, or you had to hard code things. They were kind of ugly, but having basedirs is really nice. So anyway, we've said that in our base directory, we're going to have a folder called templates. And let's go ahead and make templates, just to make sure that it's there. I have kind of a habit formed over years of writing Django that typically anything I do which isn't concrete. So, excuse me, a base layout that's going to be for the entire site or a partial, they always get prepended with an underscore. So we're going to make another directory inside templates called layouts. And inside layouts, we're going to have base.html, which that's going to be our base HTML template. And I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And then the best part about making notes ahead of time, I can copy and paste. So let me see if there's anything in here that I feel like I should point out. Yeah, there is. So those of you that have never used Django before, Django's templating language provides a tag called block. These let us define overridable blocks. So in a later template, we will extend this one, just like you would extend a class in Python. And we can override blocks, just like you would override a method in Python. Yes?
Where did you put the templates directory? Is that
So it's right out here next to my manage.py. Any time that we talk about base dir, that's always next to manage.py, at least for all of these intents and purposes. Okay, so yeah, we have a couple of block tags in here, just because we have things we want to be able to override. We want to be able to change the title of a page. We want to be able to add extra CSS. We want to be able to set a headline and content and some JavaScript. One thing to point out is the end block tag, and you notice that I repeat the name, right? I said the block was content and the end block is also content. You don't have to specify the name the second time on end block, but it's generally a good idea, especially if you have a lot of nested blocks or a lot of blocks, so that you don't forget which block you just ended, right? Just to kind of keep track of where things are. All right, so templates are fairly straightforward, yeah? The idea of just having a template. I know we haven't done anything with it yet. We haven't done anything with anything yet, so that's where we're going to start now. So right now, we have nothing. We have a database that has nothing in it, has no models to it, and we have a template that never gets loaded. So what we're going to do is we want to create some views. So Django is an MVC framework, but they call themselves MVT. Instead of controllers, we have views, and instead of views, we have templates. But they work the same way as MVC stuff would. So anytime you hear me say view, just pretend it's controller. Anytime you hear me say template, pretend it's view. All right? So we've created this views.py because it didn't exist. And so now we need to add some stuff to it. This is in that survival guide subdirectory, yes. So Django also has kind of two things that people are, or one thing that people argue about, which is whether or not views should be class-based or function-based. So we're not going to use a function-based view, but I'm going to write one real quick just to show you. All right. So this is a function-based view. It takes a request and it returns something, ideally an HTTP response of some kind. Function-based views are awesome. They're very simple. They're very easy to grasp. The problem is that often you end up doing a lot of repeated boilerplate code over and over and over again. I don't particularly like function-based views most of the time, and since it's my tutorial, I'm going to show you class-based views because I think they're awesome. And also because I think they're a little bit easier to understand if you come from any sort of programming background. So we're going to make a new class-based view called homepage view. And it's just going to extend template view that Django gives us. Anyone want to guess what template view does? It renders a template. We try to make names as simple as possible. And we're going to tell it to render home.html. Okay, now home.html doesn't exist yet, right? So we need to make that as well. So that's going to be in our templates directory again. And let's talk about what it does. So first we have this extends block tag, or extends tag. And so what that does is it tells Django's template engine to go and load this other template first. That's going to be our master template. And then I'm going to be able to override bits and pieces of that. So for example, I can override the headline and say, welcome to the PyCon survival guide. And I can override the content block and say, howdy. All right, so we've overridden two blocks, and we have a little if condition in here. The if condition obviously isn't going to work yet because there's no content or no concept of a user being authenticated in what we've built. But there's going to be. So the first file we don't have to create is urls.py inside of our survival guide folder. So this is considered like our base URLs, which is actually what it's called in the settings, is base URL conf. And this controls all the URLs for our entire project. So we're going to make one. Views, import home page view. And URLs are kind of fun because you get to practice your regular expressions while you write URLs. So we're just saying that so long as there's nothing that comes after the slash, then go ahead and give us this view. And this is actually another kind of fun bit about Django. You know, I mentioned earlier that we have class-based views and we have function-based views. But I always enter a view as a function, so ultimately they're all function-based views. They're just exposed in different ways. All right, so we have that, and I should really open up a tmux or something for this, but just for now. And look, there's our Welcome to the PyCon Survival Guide, and there's our Howdy. I've been on a kick of using Howdy a lot lately, so pardon me on that. All right, so really basic thing. We have a URL that captures nothing, that just expects there to be nothing after the slash. We have a view that renders the home.html template, and the home.html template extends the base layout template. All right? Okay, let's get something a little bit more complicated. Because so far this has all been really simple. Right? You're all following along perfectly? No questions? I'm not going too fast? All right, let's go back to views. So we're going to make a new view here because we want people to be able to sign up, obviously. We'll see if I can spell view today. Yeah? The PDF link? Yeah. It is right there. Yep. All right. So this is a create view. And what a create view does is it creates new instances of a model. So let's make this. Let's finish making this one. And model equals user. All right, now I need to import a couple of things real quick. All right, so before I go too far, we'll just explain what the view does real quick. It's going to render a form, which is our user creation form. And whenever that form is valid, it will create a new instance of the user model. And it's going to use the template accounts/signup.html. All right. Back over in our URLs, we need to provide a way to get to this view. So we're going to say accounts register. Just so I stop getting bugged by my linter. Thankfully, this is going away in Django 1.8. There won't be a patterns thing there anymore. You'll just have a list. So much nicer. All right, and so we don't have that template. We need to create it. I did, thank you. Yeah, if you see me make a mistake, yell it out. I came from the West Coast yesterday, so I'm a little bit tired today. I'm just going to have the server running over there. All right, so since we said in our view that our template name was accounts signup.html, and we don't have an accounts directory yet, we need to create one. And inside there, we'll create signup.html. And signup.html is pretty simple. It actually looks a lot like our homepage one. And this block.super thing here. Okay, so first of all, this is the first time we've gotten to this, really. Anything you see that has the % sign and the curly brace, those are considered block tags. We're effectively calling a function there, right? Anytime that you see one that has just the 2 curly braces, the double mustache, then those are basically print statements. So what I'm saying is I want to put the word register in, and then a pipe, and then I want to print out whatever was in this block before, all the way up the inheritance chain. All right, and here's one of the first kind of ugly bits that we're going to fix in a moment. When you're building a web app, how often do you think you end up typing out or having forms? You kind of do a lot of stuff with forms, right? Forms are pretty common in web apps. So all right. Oh. There we go. So there's my form. It rendered. It looks okay, right? But I had to type out all that form stuff, which is really annoying if I'm creating 20, 30, 50, 100 forms across an entire project. A friend and I worked on a project together a while back. He recently went back to it. And I do believe that something like 60 different Django apps inside of it, each one with multiple forms. You don't want to type all that HTML, right? You're not using Python. You're not using a web framework to have to write HTML. So let's make that better. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install a thing called Django Crispy Forms. And I always misspell this and put in Cripsy Forms. I'm tempted to create a new package on PyPy that's just Cripsy Forms, so it'll work for me when I mistype it. So anyway, Django Crispy Forms we're gonna install, and then in our settings we have to add it to our installed apps. And like so many things in Python, it's no longer called what it was when we installed it. So we add Crispy Forms to the installed apps, not Django Crispy Forms. And then we have to tell Django Crispy Forms what template pack to use. And we want it to use Bootstrap 3. Pip installed it? Yeah. Pip install. We'll have I'm going to put all this up on GitHub at the end as well. And I'll send out a link to everybody so you'll have access to all the code. But yeah, we have 10, 15 packages that we're going to install over the course. All right, so we've installed Crispy Forms. We've told Crispy Forms to use Bootstrap for rendering stuff. Now we need to actually use Crispy Forms, right? So again, we need to create a new file. We're going to create forms.py inside Survival Guide. You don't have to have your forms separate from, say, your models or your views or whatever. It's just generally good advice to keep things cleaned up and separate, right? So let's go look at this one. We've got several imports that we need to do up here. So from we need to bring in that form that we were using in our view because we're going to extend this form and override it. Forms are just classes, so we can do all sorts of fun stuff with them. And then I know we're going to need some stuff from Crispy Forms. So I'm going to bring those things in real quick. All right, so let's make our custom registration form. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is go ahead and just super it, because we're not doing anything special at this point. We just want to pin some more stuff onto the class now that we're done. So we're going to define the helper as being form helper from Crispy Forms. Basically, when Crispy Forms renders, it looks for an attribute called helper, and then uses that to figure out how to render everything. So what the attributes are for the form, how the fields are organized, what fields are actually there, stuff like that. And so now we just name the fields that we want to have in here. And then we're going to make a button holder that holds buttons. All right. Don't worry too much about the CSS class and stuff. Effectively, we're just saying that when you render this button, give it a CSS class of button primary. And then register is going to be like the name of the button, or the name of the button, and register will be the value, what shows up on the button. All right. Any questions on what I've done? If you've done Python 00 stuff before, we're not really doing anything special here. We just instantiate the class, make sure it exists as it's supposed to, and then we attach a couple of things onto it. All right? Okay. So now we need to go change our view. Up here at the top of the view, we have this user creation form import. We don't need that anymore, but we do need to bring in the registration form. And we can take that one out, and I'm pretty sure we can, no, we need to leave that, okay. So now we use our registration form instead of the user creation form. And since we're doing a relative import, just in case you're working on some weird version of Python, we'll bring that in just to make sure everything works correctly. Okay. So that part's pretty simple, right? We've just changed what form we're going to render. So now we need to change one more thing. Got to change a little bit of stuff in our template. So when you create an app in Django, or you install a third-party app, often they provide their own sets of template tags, and you have to load those. Here's another one that you will forget every time. It's not Crispy Form tags, it's Crispy Forms tags. Oh, it's so crazy. All right, but now here's the cool part. All of that, I don't need. I just need that. So what I've done is I've taken all of my HTML, all of my form stuff that I'm doing in my template, and I'm making Python do it for me. Because I'm lazy, and I don't like doing it. So now that Python does that, what does it look like? Hey, it looks a little nicer. It looks more bootstrappy, if you care about what Bootstrap looks like. If you don't like Bootstrap, Crispy Forms has other template packs, and you can define your own. So if you have like an in-house style you have to match or whatever, Crispy Forms will let you do that. But Bootstrap is really great for demos because I don't have to worry about CSS. Okay. So any questions on what we've changed so far? No? Okay. Let's make another view. Because signing up is cool, and just to show that it does work, I'm going to go ahead and sign up. I signed up. It tried to take me to my profile page, which it doesn't have. So, but if I go back to the home page, It still looks the same. Nothing changed yet. We're going to change that so that something does change. Okay. So we need to be able to log in, right? Signing up's great, but you have to be able to log in to actually do stuff. So when we're going to make a login view, but login view is going to have a form, so let's make the form first. So back in here, we're going to bring in the authentication form from Django. Sorry, I just can't handle PEP violations. And then we're going to make a new one, which we'll call login form. And we basically do the exact same thing. You end up doing these steps kind of a lot. This is probably an area where Django Crispy Forms could provide a mix-in that makes this nicer. Okay. Again, nothing really special. We just have two fields this time, username and password. And let's go back to our views. All right. And so this one, we're going to have, this is going to be a little bit longer. We've got to do a couple of extra things. So let's bring in a couple of imports that we need. We need authenticate. We need login, and we're eventually going to need logout, so we'll go ahead and bring that in. And then from Django.core.url resolvers. All right. So let's make our login view. So it's our third special kind of view. We have a template view, which renders a template. We have a create view, which creates a model. And we have a form view, which handles a form, right? So it'll show the form, and then when the form gets posted back to it, it knows how to process and handle the form. All right, but we have to tell it what to do when the form is valid. So the nice thing is the post comes in, it does form validation. Forms all have a method called isValid, which takes whatever dictionary of data you've sent to the form and makes sure it all matches what it's supposed to be. Nothing throws any validation errors. If that's true, then the view runs the form valid method. One of the nice things about forms in Django that a lot of people don't pick up right away is that forms and the fact that they render HTML aren't necessarily something you should care about. The fact they render HTML is a nice thing. It's cool that they can render HTML. What forms really are is a nice, solid validation library. I can take a big dictionary of data, and I can send it to a form and say, does this data all match what I'm expecting? And Django will tell me yes or no. That's really, really where they're the most useful. So as you use Django, remember forms for that purpose. All right, so we need to get a couple of things off of the form. Wow, I cannot type invalid this morning. All right, so all we're doing is we're just checking to see if the username and password, when the password is hashed and salted, matches what's in the database. If it is, then we run the login function, which login just handles setting a cookie that holds on to their session, make sure that they're logged in, they're authenticated. And if that's the case, then we go ahead and just let the view finish, and what that does is it redirects to the success URL, which we've said is our home page. Awesome. I was going to say, that's a weird typo. But yeah, so we just redirect. If the username and password don't match, then we tell them the form was invalid. It's kind of a little cheat way of getting out of it. We'd probably want to tell them, specifically what went wrong, but whatever. The form is invalid if they put in the wrong password, right? It's not the right data. All right. So now we need to set up a URL for this. And I'm just going to copy and paste this one. All right, nothing crazy there. And just like before, we said there was going to be a template. So we need to make that template. And you know what? One of the nice things about templates, lots of times they're pretty similar too. All right, that's good enough for now. And since we have already crispified our form, we don't have to do all that typing I did earlier. We can just do crispy form. So let's go look at that page. All right, and if I log in with the user that I created a moment ago, there we go. Now I get my username because now I'm authenticated. Remember we had the check for if user.isAuthenticated? Now I am. So now it knows who I am, and it can give me my username. All right, any questions about logging users in, signing users up? It's a fairly simple workflow. There are packages out there that'll handle creating most of the stuff for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. Just kind of depends on how much control you want to have. All right, so one more view that's involved with auth, which is logging someone out, right? Just in case they don't like our site anymore. All right. All right, and our fourth type of view, a redirect view. Any guesses on what a redirect view does? If you said it redirects someone, it does. Reverse lazy, home. So normally we have this function called reverse. And what reverse does is it takes a URL name. You notice that whenever we've created a URL, I've had an argument at the end that was name equals something, right? Like name equals home. So reverse takes a URL name and figures out what the URL pattern would be for that. What reverse lazy does, though, is it does that only when it's actually instantiated. So I can do reverse lazy as a class attribute, and then when the view is actually loaded by accessing a URL, then it'll actually parse out what that URL is. I don't have to know what it is. I can't do that with just reverse. With just reverse, it'll throw an error, tell me that it can't be done. And I would have to override, I think it's def get redirect URL, something like that, for the redirect view. But if I don't have to override a method, I'd rather not. So reverse lazy. Django has quite a few functions that are available that all have the underscore lazy on the end of them. They all work the same way, where they have it's basically like a deferred proxy kind of thing, deferred proxy object that just gets evaluated later on. They're really handy, and I wish Django had more of them. So that's how you log someone out. You call log out. So this is one of the problems that people have with class-based views, is you kind of have to remember, you have to kind of memorize a lot of these method signatures. You have to remember that, like for instance, get and post all have to have request as an argument, unless you just do args and quargs everywhere, and that form valid takes form as an argument, things like that. If you do decide to do class-based views, and you find that memorization part very daunting, there is this wonderful, wonderful website, Classy Class-Based Views, ccbv.co.uk. And the nice thing is you can go look at, say, Create View, because Create View has a lot of stuff. Here's all the attributes that can be specified, and here's all the methods that that class has that you can override. And then, like, for instance, what that default one looks like. So it's a really handy way to be able to go and get that information quickly. You'll eventually memorize these things. I've been doing class-based views for a couple of years now, and I know most of the functions that are, or methods that are available in them and what those methods look like. But if you don't know, this is a wonderful site. What does a redirect view redirects? So if those are 301.
Yeah, but you could have just done that by, didn't you just tell it to redirect at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I can do, actually, you know what, we'll do this one as a function-based view. So we need to bring in Django.http import http redirect. And then we'll do def logout view. All right. Okay, so as if this is a function-based view, it has to have request come in as an argument. And we can just do logout request, and then return HTTP response redirect to reverse lazy home. I think I did my import wrong. Yeah. So that function-based view is equivalent to the class-based view that I wrote a moment ago. There's not really any reason to do a class-based view for a redirect unless you need to do something special inside the redirect view that you don't want to have to deal with writing a function-based view for. Something like logging out, even logging in, function-based views make a lot of sense because they're short and simple. I generally tend to find, though, that, you know, special cases aren't special enough kind of thing. So if I'm already writing class-based views everywhere else, I might as well keep writing class-based views. But yeah, it works the same way. So anyway, we have this view, and now we need a URL. But we don't need a template. So don't worry, we don't have to make yet another file. So we'll say log out. And this time we want to do logout view, which we have to import. We don't have to give it a the .as view, though, because we're just calling that function directly. We don't have to call this as view function. And so now I'm logged in, and if I go to accounts, log out, now I'm logged out. It does not show my name anymore. All right? So we've got a basic auth workflow going on. It's not the friendliest thing ever, though. So let's make it a little bit nicer. That base HTML template that we've been extending constantly and not doing anything with, we're going to add a couple of things to that. Actually, I'm going to copy and paste this real quick because it's a lot of typing. All right. So if the user isn't authenticated, then we're going to show them a link to sign up or to log in. If they are authenticated, we're going to show them a link to log out. So there's our nice little buttons. I can go log in. And I'm logged in, and now I can log out if I want to. All right? Fairly straightforward. All right. So let's look at something here. Does anyone see this as a bug? I'm logged in and I just went to the login page. Should I be able to go to the login page when I'm logged in? I mean, it doesn't hurt anything for me to log in again, but it's kind of silly to be able to do that, right? So what we can do is we can actually go and, let me turn off guides there, just in case I get more messages from Twitter. What we can do is we can go in and we can wrap our views with decorators if we want. We can do method decorator around, say, like the dispatch or the get, and say if the user's logged in, don't do this, do that, whatever. Or we can wrap those same decorators around our URLs. Don't do that, because then you're putting view logic inside your URLs file, and you're going to forget that it's there, and it's just, don't do that. So, and this is tooting my own horn, but there's a package out there called Django Braces, which I created. Anyway, and what it does is it's a lot of mix-ins for class-based views. So it handles a lot of your access common things and some other stuff with queries and stuff like that. So anyway, using that, we don't have to add it to installed apps because there's no models or anything. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that sign up and login can't be gone to unless you're anonymous, you're not logged in. And logout can't be gone to unless you're already logged in. Make sense? Okay. We also want to be able to send some messages back to the users to let them know, hey, you signed up, you should log in now, or hey, you've logged out, thanks for visiting. So to do that, we need to add a little bit to our base HTML template real quick. Django has a contrib app, which the contrib apps are really just things that may not stay around forever. So they're kind of off in their own little separate place, just in case they get pulled out later. But most of them end up staying around for a long, long time. So anyway, it's called messages, and it lets us send what's called flash messages, basically messages that last for one request cycle. So the message is created, goes into the session, the response goes out, displays the message, and the message is taken out of the session. Okay? So when they refresh again, they won't see that message again. Okay? So if we have any of those messages, then we're just going to print them out. We're going to print out all the messages that exist in the session. Okay. That's all this little block does. And the nice thing is this little block is in the Django documentation. It's also in the guide I gave you, but it's in the Django docs because it's used constantly. So if you ever need this and don't remember what all's there, just go search for messages inside the Django docs. All right, so back to our views. We're going to bring in all of Brace's views. And on this sign-up view, we're going to add in this anonymous required mix-in. And actually, I know I'm going to have another one here in a minute. So, and then we also want to do views.formValidMixin. So, sorry, formValidMessage mixin. I wrote this thing and don't remember its own name. And we're going to add a formValidMessage argument down here, or attribute. And we'll say, thanks for signing up. Go ahead and log in. And we're going to do pretty much exactly the same to this one. Anonymous. Wow, that's not it. And this one would just say something like, you're logged in now. Woo. And then this logout view, normally we want to put login required around it, and we'd want to put a message mix in on it. But as it's a function and not a class, we have to do this a little bit differently. So, see, now I have to remember where login required comes from. Anyway, so the first thing is we can do is from Django.contrib, import messages. Okay, so we're going to define a message there. And then we need to bring in that decorator that I mentioned. All right. And so all we've done is we've decorated this just like you would any other Python function. And we've said that if someone who's not logged in tries to access this view, then you redirect them to the login page as a 301. We can also set it to be permanent equals true, which will send a 302, depending on what your needs are. Maybe the item no longer exists, whatever, you want to redirect them away from it. So let's see if these work. So I'm logged in. All right. That took me someplace that doesn't exist, but that's what it was supposed to do. And if I go to sign up, register, it should do the same thing. Yep, redirects me again. And let's go to log out. I'm logged out. Yeah, there's my message. I've been logged out. And now if I try to go to log out again, it tells me to log in, which is odd, but what we've told it to do. So we're just making it to where our views are a little bit more sane in how they behave. There's not a problem with showing users the login view if they're already logged in, but it's kind of weird to do that. Generally better to take them to like a profile page or something like that. Also, bringing in the idea of using mix-ins. So since classes are just views, or views are just classes, yeah?
In a real app, how would you get those strings out of the code somewhere?
Like these here? I guess it kind of depends on how far you need to take them out of the code. So like when most Django things, and including Django braces, there's a get form valid message, I think. There's usually a function or a method that exists that will let you programmatically build whatever the thing is. So in this case, I can build the string and have it say, hey, Chris, thanks for registering. Please go sign up now, or check your email, or whatever, right? If I then want to make sure that that string is stored in, say, settings, or maybe it's in the database or whatever, I'd do that inside that function, right? I'd go and fetch it from the database or the settings or whatever. You can't really get any more removed than that. I mean, obviously, the class has to have access to it from somewhere. But yeah, if you don't want to hard code things. One of the nice things is, though, and I can't remember the exact import path, so you're going to have to forgive me on that part, but Django has a translation library. So if you want to provide your site in, say, French and English, since we're in Montreal, you can use the translation library, and it has a function for getting text that is lazily evaluated. So it's a uGetTextLazy. So you can put that around your message. Typically, it gets imported as underscore. So you could do that, which would then make it to where that string is lazily translated. So if the user's session is set to English, it'll fetch the English string for them. If it's set to French, it'll fetch the French string for them. If it's set to German, it'll fetch the German string for them. So if you want the text to always be the same, but just translated, you don't have to deal with overriding a method. You can just have uGetTextLazy do it for you. As an American who doesn't deal with a lot of international stuff, I don't use uGetTextLazy very often. I try to, I just always forget about it. But it is very handy and it does work really well. I know it's used by a lot of Django installations. All right, so we've got views being controlled on how they're accessed. We've got messages coming back to the user, and users can log in, sign up, and log out. All right? Any questions on kind of what we're getting to so far? Anybody just hopelessly, miserably lost and want me to go back to something? Yeah? You have a question?
Well, I kind of came in a bit late, trying to follow on the guide.
Okay. We've just moved on to the part that starts with the Talks app. That's what I'm about to get to.
Yes, it might be helpful
Yeah?
if you just did the overall structure again. You had templates,
Sure. So let's,
and URL.
oh, that's a little messy. That's a little bit better. So if we do tree, this is inside of our survival guide folder, our outer survival guide folder, right, where we did Django start app. And so we have our database, which is the db.sqlite file. We have manage.py, which Django gives us. That's kind of our entry point to all the things that Django offers, all the different commands that we can have Django do for us, or that we can write ourselves if we want. So then we have survival guide, which I always consider that to be a stub. It's not an actual app. It doesn't have models. We don't list it in installed apps. It's not, you don't typically write tests for it, things like that. It holds on to your settings. It holds on to your WSGI file, as you can see, settings in WSGI. It holds on to your base URLs. In our case, we have a couple of views that we don't really need to create a whole new app for. If we were doing a custom user, we'd want to make a new app. But as all we're doing is using Django's default users, but we're giving our own custom sign up, log in, log out, profile edit, whatever pages, then we can just put them into this app. We just had to create those files ourselves. So that's where views.py and forms.py came from, because we needed those views and forms. And then we have our templates directory, which we made. This is our global site-wide templates. We're going to make some app-specific templates in a moment, but those are the global ones. And inside there we have a folder called _layouts, which has a base.html. That's kind of our global overarching, every page is going to extend to this template, but we don't want to type that code every single time, so that's why we provide one to be extended, right? And then we have our accounts area where we have our login and sign up forms, or sorry, not forms, templates. And then we have our home template, which is shown when they go to just our base URL. All right? Yes?
So I have a question about the manage.py.
Okay.
Very, very early on, you set to PyCon manage.py and then migrate to create.
Yeah, that's a little typo in the guide. I just noticed that when I pulled it up. And I was like, oh, that should say syncdb instead of migrate. Yes, that first one should be syncdb, syncdb. We will get to migrations soon. But yeah, that first one should be syncdb. I'll fix that and re-upload the stuff. So if you want to download them tonight, tomorrow, they should be corrected. Or just when that one fails, as it will every single time, just change it to syncdb. All right. We got a few more minutes before we have our break, so let's start looking at an actual app. So we're only going to have one app in our project, but Django has this idea of apps, which often confuses people because the naming is a little weird. If I'm building a web app, the entire thing is an app, right? Because it's a web app. But in Django, my web app will have a bunch of apps in it. You get to use the word app a lot. So basically, an app is a bunch of code related to one or two models. You can have multiple, you can have as many models as you want, but if you start getting 5, 6, 10 models, generally your app has grown and become very, very unruly, so you want to kind of refactor it. But typically, it's a couple of models, the forms, views, and URLs that relate to those models. Okay? So, as I said, we're building a thing for PyCon for tracking which talks we want to go to. So, to give an idea of what we're going to have a couple of models. We're going to have one that's a list of talks. So I can say, these are the talks I definitely want to go to. These are the ones I want to watch online. These are the ones that I have no interest in. These are the ones I should tell my friend Jill about, whatever, right? And then each of those lists will obviously have a bunch of talks inside of it, right? I want forms for creating lists. I want forms for creating talks. I want to be able to move talks from one list to another. I want to be able to rate them. And I want to be able to keep notes about them. Right? It sounds like a lot of stuff. It's actually pretty simple and straightforward. Hopefully we're going to have it done and deployed in 2.5 hours that are remaining. All right, so let's start. But that's what we're going to do. All right, so as I said, manage.py is kind of our gateway into Django's internals. And so we're going to tell Django to start an app for us. And we're going to name the app Talks. Typically, apps are named as the plural of whatever their main model is going to be. Because my Talks app deals with multiple talks, right? All right. And if we did a tree of talks, then this is what Django gives me. I've got an init.py because it's a Python module, obviously. Admin.py, which will make it show up in the admin. We won't do a lot on the admin today. We may not do any. But Django gives you that so you can start putting things into Django's generated admin. Which, if you show the admin to somebody that's only done like PHP CMSs all their life, their head explodes. It's awesome. Models.py, which is where your models will live. Test.py, which is where you'll write tests. And views.py, which is where you'll write views. Django doesn't necessarily assume that you're going to have forms, so it doesn't auto-generate a forms.py. We will have them, so we'll make one later. But you can put anything in here that you want, obviously. It's just a Python module. Okay. So let's start looking at our models.py. Isn't that file exciting? A whole 2 lines. All right. So models in Django are fairly straightforward. Again, they're just a class. Everything in Django is a class, basically. Forms are classes, models are classes, views are classes, templates work like classes. Template tags aren't classes. They can be. Anyway, so we're going to make a model called talkList. I'm not going to name it list for obvious reasons. And so then, as attributes of our class, these are our fields. So the first field that we're going to have is a foreign key to user, which we'll import in a moment, and then related name of lists. And related name tends to confuse people as well. It confused me for the longest time, too, until I realized what it's meant to be. What would the thing that I'm foreign keying to call this thing? So a user would call this its lists, right? Or its talk lists or something. So that's what I'm specifying in related name. What is really cool is this makes it where I can do, like, say, request.user, which is my user inside of a view, .list.all, and I have all of the lists that belong to that user. I don't have to go and look up my talk lists and filter it on the user. Django gives you a nice little reverse foreign key thing there, which is really handy. All right, we're going to have a name, which will just be a char field. And we have to specify a max length. We'll give a nice long one. And then we're going to have a slug. And we'll give it the same max length. And so what is a slug? This comes over from, Django started as a newspaper CMS for the Lawrence World Journal and some others. And so the idea of having a slug is like a short little name that you'd refer to a story by. So in our URL, we're going to have a short little name that we'll refer to a talk list by. So if it's called talks to attend, then we'll call it talks-to-attend, right? Just so that we don't have to expose the database ID, the primary key of the item. Not that it matters if somebody sees, that it's number 5 or number 82 or whatever, but it's just nicer not giving them numbers. All right. Then we can define some meta attributes about our model. And so we're going to say that the user and the name have to be unique together in combination. So you as a user can't have more than one list with the same name. Kind of for obvious reasons, but we still have to tell it that. And then we're going to define Unicode. If we were doing this as Python 3, you'd want to define str instead of Unicode, since Python doesn't have the idea of Unicode. or Python 3 doesn't. Everything's Unicode. We're just going to send back the name. And then when we save an instance of this model, we want to do something. We want the self.slug, wow, to be the, wow, slugified version of the name. So just every time we save this, update the slug to be whatever the output of slugify is for the name. And then all right, this is a big long line that looks kind of scary, and let's explain what it does. We call reverse, which as we mentioned before is the non-lazy version of reverse lazy. And then we pass in a URL name. Now, this URL name has colons in it. These colons represent namespaces. So we can have multiple sets of URLs that have the same name within them. So I can have 20 different apps, and each of those apps can have a view within it, or a URL within it that's named list. Because I always want to be able to show a list of my models, right? But since they're so long as I namespace them per app, there won't be any conflicts. Django won't get confused about what URL I want. So we're going to set up namespaces in a moment. They're a little different, a little strange, not necessarily something you do in the basic Django tutorial, but I think they make code organization a lot better. So anyway, inside the talks namespace, inside that, the lists namespace, there will be a URL named detail. And that URL needs an argument, which is slug, and we're going to pass in the slug of the instance that we're on. We're about to bring that in. Yeah, I haven't imported those yet. Okay, so that's our model. Fairly straightforward, simple model, right? So now let's do our imports. We have to bring in the user model. What are you doing, Sublime Text? You have no idea how long it took me to memorize that from django.core.url resolvers, you import reverse. That URL resolvers is horrible to memorize. And then all right, so slugify normally is something you end up calling as a template filter. But template filters and template tags are effectively just functions. So you can import them and call them anywhere that you need them. So inside of our model, we want to do slugify on this. That's there. Slugify generally works best on ASCII content. So if you know that you're going to have all sorts of crazy Unicode stuff, there are some other packages to look at that are probably better to use than Django's default slugify. UUslug and Awesome Slugify, I think, are the names of those. For our purposes, we don't need those, but
again, Slugify is giving you some type of alias name.
So let me just show you what it does. Assuming I can type. All right. A long and spacey name. Boom. Okay? It all gets lowercase, and our spaces get replaced with hyphens. So we have something that's nice and safe to stick into a URL for showing somebody something. All right? You don't. No. You don't typically ever need to go from slug to string. That'd be almost impossible to do because you wouldn't be able to know if capitalization, strange punctuation that got stripped out, whatever. Generally, slugs are just used as a unique and uniform way to look stuff up, right? Which is what we're going to do. All right. So, all right. So let's make. Actually, I'm going to switch things around a little bit here real quick, since we have a break soon. So we're going to actually install a thing called South. I almost feel bad for talking about South because when Django 1.7 comes out, you don't really need South anymore because it basically got merged into Django. But we're not on 1.7 yet, and it's still good to know about South. So we're going to install South. Oh, and those of you that may not know about this, have you noticed that it says downloading but then never shows any progress? It's because I'm using a thing called Wheels. If you haven't looked into Wheels yet, those are amazing. It's basically a local binary copy of whatever packages you want to install. You don't ever have to hit the network to install stuff you've already installed, which is really nice. All right. Anyway, so South lets us do migrations since things migrate south. I know, who'd have thought there'd be jokes in Python? South does have a model, so we have to add it to our installed apps. And we're not going to add our Talks app yet, because I don't want the Talks model to get put into my database just yet. So anyway, now that South is in there, I can do Python manage.py syncdb again. The reason that we need South is because syncdb is stupid. Syncdb basically just says, does this table exist in the database? Yes? Okay, skip it. No? Okay, create it. It doesn't care that I've changed fields, that I've changed arguments to fields, that I've renamed something. It doesn't care about any of that. syncdb doesn't ever look at that stuff. syncdb only says, does this table exist? Which is why we need South. South lets us control migrations between what tables look like. And so this next part is really long. You have to type out schema migration. And then since this is our first one, oh, sorry, we have to do one thing first. Haha, we add Talks into our installed apps. Okay. So this is what you have to type the first time you create a migration for an app. You have to put in this -- initial, because this is my initial migration. All right? Every other time you're going to do auto instead of initial. So those are the only two you have to change. Typing out Python manage.py schema migration over and over and over again is really annoying. So I suggest making a shell alias for that. Yeah. Just so you don't have to type things constantly. So you can see this added a model called talks.talklist. That's my app. That's my model, right? And it made a unique constraint for user and name, and it created this initial migration. Now this doesn't exist in the database yet. That's why it told me to go ahead and run something else. So I can do python manage.py migrate talks, and now the table exists in the database. Okay? It's a two-step process that you get to do a lot. Some of those things, again, you start building up shell aliases, and you make it to where you don't have to type this stuff constantly. Okay, so stuff now exists in the database. This isn't in the book, but let's go ahead and do this real quick, just to kind of show you what's there. Import talk list, admin.site.register talk list. All right. So nothing fancy there. Let's go to my admin. Log in with my super user I created earlier, and I've got talk lists in the database. And I can create a new one, whatever. This, by the way, is the thing I said if you show this to people that make PHP or Perl CMSs all day, and you go, look, I didn't have to do anything. I typed 3 lines and it shows up. They may try to kill you, but they love it. So it's awesome. Anyway, I don't use the admin much, so I don't find it as useful. But do you have a question? No? Thought I saw a hand. All right. So since we have that, let's do one more thing, and then I think it's time for the break. In our views, oh, I'm sorry, not that views.py. Our talks views.py. We need to make a new view. And so what we need to do, I don't need any of that stuff. All right. I know eventually this is going to be a class-based view that shows one of my talk lists. But for now, I'm just going to make something really simple, which is just going to be generic.view. And okay. So that's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But now we need to create a URL for it. And I like to keep the URLs for my apps inside my apps. So each app has its own urls.py. Again, I'm just making sure things are organized in a nice, clean way. So we're going to touch talks urls.py. There's the file. All right. Okay, and this is what we normally start with, is something similar to this. But we're going to do a namespace inside here. And we're going to do just a really simple one. We need to import that. All right. So we have this pattern, but it's inside list patterns. And as kind of a magic variable thing, Django looks for something called URL patterns inside of URLs. So our URL patterns currently doesn't have anything in it. This is where we're going to get that kind of double namespace thing. So we're going to add a new one in here. We're going to say anything that starts with lists, we're going to include list patterns with a namespace of lists. All right? So that's our inner namespace, lists. So we can do lists : detail and get that top one. But this URL patterns isn't registered with Django yet. So we pop back over to our other one that now has a bunch of stuff in it. And we'll do talks. Let's see, we'll make sure it starts with talks. It really doesn't matter, though. And we'll include talks.urls with a namespace of talks. So now we have talks : lists : detail available, right? And so if I was to go to sorry. I think I made a typo in this one. Yep. There we go. So if we were to go there, we just get this, a talk list. Nothing special, but it's there. All right. I think that's probably a good spot for us to stop for the break. Because I think it's supposed to be at 10:20. I don't know. We'll say it's 10:30. We'll go on. Okay, so we have our model. We have a URL and a fake view. So it probably makes sense that when someone signs up, they automatically get a list for them, right? Because you're probably going to want to have a list to put talks onto, otherwise you're not going to be using this. So let's go ahead and make a list whenever someone signs up. So we need to do from talks.models import talk list. And in this signup view, we're going to override form valid, because that's what's run whenever they successfully sign up. right? We're going to grab the normal response of the form valid. So everything gets saved, the user's created, all that stuff's done. But we want to do something extra right now. We're going to create a new one where the user is the object that was created by the create view, which we know is a user model. And we're going to name this one to attend. And then we're going to return the response. So let me go back over here to my admin and go to my users. And I'm going to delete this user that I created earlier. Yep, I'm sure. Okay. So let's go log out from being that user. And let's sign up. And it doesn't know where to take me. That's fine. Go to here. I don't see anything special in this part, right? But let's go to the admin and log in. Which apparently I can't do. There we go. So now if I go look at talk lists, there should be a list that belongs to that user. Hey, there's a list. And it belongs to that user. So we have our migration, which created a model. We have a URL and a view that don't really matter at this point, but it's a nice thing to have for being able to set stuff up in the future. And whenever a user signs up, we automatically create a list for them called to attend. We could change the name, make it something else if we wanted to, it wouldn't matter. We'll make it so they can change the name, of course. We don't want people to be stuck with whatever name we give them. So we've kind of got the beginnings of a basic app workflow. Yeah? Any questions on models or migrations? Yeah?
Why did you need to do a migration to this table?
So I don't have to do a migration just to create a new table, right? I can do syncdb and it'll just create the new table. But as I said, syncdb is fairly stupid. So we generally want to have smarter model control. So we use South to create these initial migrations so that we have like a starting point. So in a moment, we're going to change the model. I say in a moment, after we come back from break. We're going to change the model. And then we can tell South to create a new migration from how the model is now to how it is once we save the changes to the model. And it'll be able to run SQL code against our database to actually modify the table. syncdb cannot do that. So if we ever want to change what's in a model, we don't want to get it right the first time. We have to use something like South, or we have to go and hand change our database, which sounds fine when you're doing development, but once you have something live on 50 servers,
You are doing development. You just throw away the database and
you just have to put in all that data all over again. So you have to create your super users again, you have to do all that kind of stuff. You can get a little bit more tactical and just say delete the tables that you need to delete and rebuild those. But you tend to spend more time fiddling with the database when you're doing that than you do actually like writing code. So doing the migrations tends to speed up code development. What is a migration? Let's look at one. They're actually kind of cool. So this is what, okay, as I said, South is getting merged into Django. They look very different in Django 1.7. But as far as South migrations are concerned, this is what a migration looks like. And it's actually kind of cool because you've got this class, which is a schema migration. And there's this def forwards, and there's a def backwards, as you can see down there a little bit below. So what's cool is when I apply this migration going forward, making the number get bigger, it starts off at 0. This is migration number 1, so it gets bigger, right? It runs forward. And so forward goes and creates a table that has these 4 fields and sends out a signal and then creates this unique constraint, right? When I run backwards, making the numbers go smaller, so I go from 1 to 0, it deletes the unique constraint and deletes the table. You can also do data migrations inside South, which are basically a blank canvas. You just get a a forwards and a backwards method or methods that have no code in them. So I can say, okay, I had all of these users, and I want to make sure that all of their usernames now start with an underscore for whatever reason. I can have South run through all of my users that exist in a certain model, or all my models if I want, do something to them as the forwards, and then undo that something to them as the backwards. And I can modify data inside the migration as well, not just the schema of the table. On something that's really small like what we're building today, migrations kind of seem like overkill because we could just nuke the database and start over. You're not generally going to build tiny little things like we're going to do today, though. So it's good to know about doing migrations. And all of your South migrations that you build are compatible with the migrations that Django's bringing in 1.7. There's like a conversion script you can run that updates them and makes them work. Or you can compress them all into one migration, which is generally the better idea. All right, so any other questions before we go on a 20-minute break? No? All right, I think there are snacks and stuff in the hall. So, as evidenced by someone bringing some in. So, yeah. There you go. You question? Yeah. How you change the, like from Python 2.7 to Python 3.3 or whatever? Or the other way around. When you create the virtual environment, you can pass in, I think it's --, Python, or --, Python interp or something like that. And you just tell it which Python to use. What I find is really handy is, are you using PyEnv? No? Okay, there's a thing called PyEnv, which works like RBENV, if you've heard of that one from the Ruby world. Basically, you can have multiple Python versions installed side by side, like infinite numbers of Python versions side by side, and site-wide, like computer-wide, or directory-specific. Yes, alarm, I know. Or directory-specific, you can tell it what version of Python to use. And it has a virtual env tie-in, if I remember correctly, where you can basically do like PyEnv virtual env 2.7 or something like that, right? And it'll create one for 2.7. Or you can do 3.3 and it'll do 3.3. It's not, depending on what you're doing, PyEnv can be overkill. I build several different like open source packages for Django, and I want to be able to test them against multiple versions of Python. It's really hard to have like Python 3.3 and Python 3.4 installed at the same time on a Mac, on a lot of systems, but you know, it's tricky. So PyEnv makes that really easy, and then I can have Tox run my tests against all of them. But yeah, it just kind of depends on what you're doing. I'm pretty sure the base virtual env lets you pass in a Python interpreter to use. There's a lot of moving pieces. It has gotten better as far as things being more fleshed out and more stable, but there are a lot of moving pieces in the Python and especially in the Django world. One thing I've noticed when I've been teaching is that people get really lost in the fact that there's, you know, you have to have easy install and you have to have pip and you have to have this and that, and then somebody's on Python 2.7, somebody's on Python 3.3, and like there's so many little pieces. Well, hopefully it works. Well, you have a guide that you can go through later, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I wish we didn't have the vast chasm between 2 and 3. For making it to where if you get on the wrong side and you're lost, like what are you going to do at that point? Oh yeah, yeah. Well, Twisted's crazy. Twisted's still old style classes for a lot of stuff, isn't it? If I remember correctly, like early Twisted. Like Twisted came around before new style classes. So a lot of Twisted is still old style classes, which are just weird. They don't extend from object, they extend from like nothing. And yet somehow they still work. I don't know. I don't understand it.
Maybe I will this afternoon.
if you do, find me and come tell me how it works, because I don't know. How's it going?
Good, yeah. I kind of went a little beyond the polls app.
Okay.
And,
So you've done the polls app, though?
yeah.
All right, good.
I've actually started playing with my own app.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's good to see the way that you're laying out, because some of that was kind of confusing, the project name inside the project.
Yeah, that came around in like 1.5, I think, 1.5, and I remember the first time I built built a project with like 1.5, and there was like this and I was like, why are there, like, what is this thing? Why is this here?
I started catching on where I started putting a lot of stuff in the base,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm finding, why do I have all this stuff? I'm down here. It's
Yeah.
really just basic, my base template and all that. So I started moving it into that area, but it looks to me like that I was moving in the right direction in that way. But I'm really having difficulty getting URLs right.
Yeah.
It's like the hardest thing for me. It's like, well, I'm not hitting the right URL.
Yeah, it seems like URLs, especially since it's regex, it messes up a lot of people. Like, because regexes are just weird, you know? And then...
Well, their regex is a little different. They put some special...
There are a couple of things, yeah. I mean, for the most part, it's a pretty straightforward Python regex. So it's not too bad as far as, like, translating from, okay, I know how to do regex in Python, I can do a URL. But it's not always, like, one-to-one, so...
Right. Well,
I'll move out of the way if anybody's trying to see those.
Perl regex. So,
Yeah, Perl's a little different, too.
yeah, that's why I'm...
Yeah.
I haven't dealt a lot.
There's actually a really great... people probably aren't looking at this for the moment, so I'll show you stuff. Whoop, sorry. Wrong Chrome. There's a site called pythex.org, which is amazing. So basically, you type in your regular expression up here, and you type in whatever string you have down here, and it'll show you like what's caught by your different matches and stuff like that. And it's like all live, and like it's amazing. This site, regex confuses the best of us, and this like helps so much.
Yeah, but even if I've got a decent grasp of the regex,
You're still having a hard time getting to the right view.
and I'm saying, okay, I'm just bouncing from one page, one URL to the next. I guess I still don't have a good grasp of the basics.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to help you with that today. We're going to write several more URLs, so
At some point, the light bulb's gonna click on.
a lot of it's
I saw
practice.
underscore lazy a lot.
Mhm.
Wasn't really sure if I should.
Lazy is awesome. I recently put out a little project that for the first time I got to create like my own lazy objects, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I get to do lazy stuff.
Hey, sorry, I
Yeah.
was late, so I'm just catching up.
Okay.
Why am I getting like a migrant not following myself?
Yeah, that's a typo on that first one. So instead of doing migrate, do syncdb, syncdb. I'm going to fix that after the class. You need a C before the D,
So I'm
syncdb.
getting it because I don't have migrant. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have South installed yet. So once you get South installed, then migrate will work, but it wouldn't make any sense at this point.
How do I install something? I just put in the settings.
Pip install, and then the package. And then if the package provides template tags,
Oh, I pip
models,
install the
something
package.
else. Yeah, you have to pip install first, because it has
And
to
then
go
add it
into
the
your...
settings and it's up
And
and
then sometimes you add it into settings, sometimes you don't. It depends on what the package provides.
running. And so do I have to run migrate every time I change the model?
Yeah.
Or- Okay.
We'll do that 2 or 3 times today, so you'll get comfortable with it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got 2 or 3 times of doing that.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
And even if we don't get to all of them, they're all in the book. So the guide that I
Okay.
gave.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like 30 pages. I really did end up writing a book. I didn't plan
How long is the
to.
break?
About 20 minutes.
Okay. Cool.
And I went to that readthedocs.org, but I don't see how, let's see. It has a bunch of things displayed that aren't related to this class.
I'm sorry, you went to where?
I went to that first URL.
The top one?
Yeah, what is all this? Feature, I said, and that is the exact URL you have right there. And,
Weird, yeah, that should be showing up. Let's just
How the
search.
heck
Just
did I
just search
find-
for it there. Search for GSWD and see if it shows up.
GSWD.
Yeah.
No results found.
Okay, let me go check it. Let me make sure I have
Just
it
a quick
live.
question.
Okay.
Once you're done, will you upload your finished, like your
Yes, I'll put the whole thing up on GitHub. I can send out a message to the entire class. Well, I can send a message out to the entire class. So once I have it live, then I'll send an email out to everybody with where it is. What was I looking for? Oh yeah, over here. Nope, not over there. Over here. Haha. Let me make sure I have it live because I went to it earlier. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, but it's my thing, so maybe I've... Yeah, it's set to to public. Okay. Well, how about that URL? Does that work? Hey.
Sorry, I was late.
It's okay.
I'm having trouble following along.
Okay.
So I started reading the docs and I was able to get the server up running, but I don't see the login form, so I'm just wondering what.
Okay, so when you go to...
So I did.
Like you've created the views and the form and the template, and then when you go and the URL, and then when you go to /account/login, it doesn't show you the page.
Oh, /login.
Yeah. So once it's live and working, then you have to go to. Sorry, not there. Let me log out so that I can log in again.
I have to run, what is it, Python manage.py.
Run server. Yeah. And then you'll go to a URL like that if you copy what's in the book, and then that'll put you.
Oh, okay.
That'll show you that form, or should. If it doesn't, let me know because something's wrong, but it should.
So actually,
Okay.
the impression I followed as close as I could.
Okay.
So I'm registering a new user. And
Yeah, so it tries to take you to what it considers to be like a profile page. There's some defaults that Django provides. We haven't created that. We're not going to create that. So we will change where it takes you
okay, so
Um,
it's no more this.
soon. Yeah.
And then the other thing is when I log in,
Uh-huh.
so that works now,
Mhm.
except it doesn't give me a nice bootstrappy message.
Okay.
Well, when I
So
log out, it works.
okay, so let's see your view.
So this would be this.
Uh-huh. And then there's your login view. And then form valid message.
Logged in.
Okay, so
here as well.
yeah, you have fallen prey to Python's inheritance tree. So anything that's listed as mixin, you want to make sure is on the right or on the left-hand side of your thing.
Okay.
And anything that's listed as a view generally goes on the far right. So the idea is that your ultimate class is all the way to the right, right? Because we parse things like this. So we want the mixins.
Method resolution order.
Or, well, no, wait, we parse things like this. So we want the class to exist, and then the mixins can call super to get back up to the class, right? To the actual view. So that's our idea. So our view defines form valid, right? And then our mixin overrides form valid and calls super, which goes back to the view's form valid, right? So you have to have your MRO
Well, I guess
in the
it
right
depends
order.
how-
I mean, occasionally you may want mixins to come later, but generally,
I guess it depends on how the mixing is doing it.
Right.
In which order it does.
So anybody here for their first PyCon? Like first ever? Wow, cool. Decent number of people. PyCon's a good conference. So you still have many, many days of conference to do, too. Unless you're only here for tutorials, and then you only have one more day. So. So any of you that are sticking around for a few days and want to find out more about Django, there's a free workshop coming up on Thursday from Andrew Godwin and I think Simon Willison and Nathan Yergler. Yeah, those three. So it's going to be about running Django at like a larger scale, stuff like that. So it'd be a good thing to go to. It's free. Can't beat that. And Andrew is the one responsible for South and the new migrations in Django 1.7. So if you have problems with migrations or you want to yell at him about how long schema migration is to type out, you can go to this and talk to him. Don't yell at him. He's a nice guy, but just he'll be there. But yeah, so that's coming up on Thursday from 1:30 to 3. So. Large scale is in like a migration that does a lot of things or having a lot of migrations.
Having a migration that's a massive database.
Obviously, there's a lot of ways to handle having a migration against a very large database.
Does something like migrations actually, I would say, work properly?
Yeah, they just take time. So if you're dealing with a 500,000 member data set, huge, huge amount of data, it's going to take a while to run through all that data.
So I'll give you an
Sure.
example that we had. We had a bunch of Java developers and we inherited something that uses hyperscale.
Okay.
So code change creates a bunch of SQL statements that actually modifies the database.
Okay.
One of these changes was fine. It was like adding a space somewhere, or just changing a column format. Production, it took us 5 hours
Right.
to run that single change.
Right.
Are there ways to manage that, or?
Ways to manage that wouldn't necessarily be part of Django or Python. I'm not a DBA, so I can't give you really good examples, but what a lot of people would probably end up doing is having a copy of the database, so a hot swap copy, apply the change to that, and then swap. All right? So you don't lose anything.
You kind of step out of you get out of the framework and you do it outside.
Right. And it'd be something where you'd have a database that's not getting hit by external processes, by users or whatever. That one gets the stuff run on it. It'll probably run faster because it's not having to deal with other reads and writes. And then you'd swap that out with the one that's your actual production database, and you'd want to catch it up to any writes that it had missed. But yeah, that's a really messy area, and I can't say that I'm qualified to give you great answers on that.
Okay, no, it's just been curiosity because I see the same thing in.
Yeah, it's something you'd want to step out of whatever framework you're working in. I think any framework that tries to do everything for everyone is going to be very mediocre at most things. So anything that's like, we can handle everything for you, I'd probably worry about. Django is a little bit getting to that point of having just so many batteries included. It's still a really good framework, and they've done a good job of keeping things at a high quality control, but it does a lot of stuff, so some of it does suffer occasionally. All right, so let's get back to building stuff. I'm going to go ahead and log in again. I can never type. This is like the password I use for all of my example stuff, and I can never type it. There. All right. Okay. Wow. Seems a little loud. All right. Let's make some more views, because we haven't made enough of these yet. So in our talk views, right, let's start off having the detail one. We created that because our model mentions it in the get absolute URL, which we're going to talk about what get absolute URL does in a moment. But really, the first thing we want to do is we want to show a list of talks. You want to see all the ones that you've created, or all the lists. You want to see a list of all the talk lists that you've created, right? So let's we're going to use Django braces again because we want things to be constrained to the logged in user. You have to be logged in. And then we want to just make sure that we just bring in all the models, just because it's annoying to have to type out model names constantly. I do a lot of things because they're annoying to do other ways. The first of our fun named things, the talk list view. And we're going to have login required on this. And it's a list view, which, if I remember correctly, is another new view type for us, right? Okay. All right, so it's a list view. List views show a list. Big surprise there. Again, we try to name things very obviously. But what we're doing, though, normally if I did this list view, say we've got 100 users, you went to this page, you would see every list that belongs to every user. Or, well, you'd see like the first 20, because pagination is turned on by default, if I remember correctly. So we don't want that. What we want is to actually only show the list that belong to the current user, which is over overriding get query set. So in get query set, we say, take the user who is requesting this page and give me all of the lists that belong to them due to that reverse foreign key. Reverse foreign keys are really nice, and they start being something you get kind of addicted to. So they're good. All right. And we didn't specify a template name. So Django has some kind of smart defaults for views that would render a template. If you don't specify a template name, it uses these defaults. So by default, how many times can I say that word? The template name will be the app name, and then a slash, and then the model name, an underscore, and in this case, list.html. So I don't see the point in having to specify a template name for every single view, so I'm just going to use Django's. But now let's talk about where we're going to put them. So if I do a tree of talks, so this is my talks thing, right? There's nothing special in there. And I have this templates folder out here. I could put all of them in there. But these are templates that belong to a specific app. These are never going to be used by another app. It wouldn't make any sense for another app to use these. And if I wasn't building something that's very specific, maybe I was building something a little bit more generic, I might want to make this to where it could be installed into other projects and still use those templates and have all the templates hanging around with it. So we're going to create our templates inside of our app. And this part is a little bit weird. So we want to do it inside the app, so we say talks. And then we want to have a directory called templates, because that's our standard word for where templates go, right? But then Django wants us to namespace these so that we can refer to them by the app name. So we have to have another directory inside there called talks. So talks, templates, talks, which is fun. And then we're going to touch talks, templates, talks, talk list, list.html. All right. Yes, I dislike that path as much as you all do, but you get used to them. And, you know, code editors do the whole fuzzy finding thing, so it's not that bad. All right. So let's look at what goes on in here. And again, I'm going to copy and paste this in because it's a lot of code. But we'll talk about it. Okay. So we extend the base again. We override the title again, as we've been doing. Nothing crazy there. We put a big H1 that says your lists. And then let's look at what goes on in here because we have a new tag. This tag is for object and object list. So I didn't create anything called object list inside the view, right? Like I didn't override context data, nothing like that. So what Django provides when you do a list view is it provides two things which are actually the same thing. So it goes and it does whatever your query set is. It goes and fetches all your items. And then it assigns that to two different variables in your context dictionary. The first one is whatever the model name is, underscore list. So it'll do talk list underscore list. And that's all of my talk lists that I told it to select. And it also has another one which is object list, object underscore list. So if I want to make it to where I can copy and paste these templates to some degree from one app to another, because as I've said before, I'm lazy and don't like typing things if I don't have to, I just use object list, because I always have object list in a list view. So if I know it's always going to be there, I might as well use it, right? So I can loop through all the things that are in my object list, and I've got this get absolute URL, which goes to the model and says, give me your absolute URL, which we defined on the model. We defined get absolute URL. And then this will render the Unicode that we told it. So it's just going to print out the name of our list, right? And then empty is also a new tag. If there are no talk lists, somebody for some reason has deleted all of their lists, or it's like our super user and they don't get one because they don't use the sign up view, then it'll just say that you don't have any lists. Okay? And then we've got a little button down here that doesn't go to anywhere yet for creating a new list. Obviously, it doesn't go anywhere because we don't have that view yet. Right? Okay, any questions on the template? No? I know there's a lot of HTML, but most of it you can ignore. It's just stuff for Bootstrap to look pretty. Okay. So let's go back to our URLs. We obviously don't want the detail view to be the final URL. So let's do we'll do that for where it goes to. And so what this says is it's going to have a D at the beginning, and then we're going to capture a pattern, and we're going to call that captured pattern slug, and it's going to be any combination of word characters and hyphens. Because what does our slug look like? It's word characters and hyphens, right? So that's what we want to capture. And then we want to do a new one up top here, which will be our views.talklist view. And we'll give it a name of list. There we go. Had a typo. Okay. So now, logged in. Hey, look. There's my list that was auto-created for me. Now, if I try to go to it, I don't get anything. It doesn't go anywhere yet. But, although that should. Why does that not go anywhere? I don't know. We'll figure it out in a moment. Okay, so anyway, there's my list. So now let's create our detail view. I'm going to close a couple of these things because we don't need them anymore. Okay. So we have this detail view that we created earlier. And this obviously doesn't do us any good. So let's change it. So we want to make this login required. Right? You have to be logged in to go look at a talk that you've saved. Or a list that you've saved, rather. Sorry. Prefetch we'll talk about in just a moment. And then it's going to be a detail view. And then def get query set self. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on in here. So the first thing that's brand new that we haven't ever looked at before is prefetch related. So Django has a ORM method that you can call that's called prefetch related. And it also has one called select related. They work similarly, but on opposite sides. So if we have a reverse foreign key, excuse me, we want to use prefetch related. And so what that does is it actually does two queries. One query to go and get the thing that we have, and another query to go and get all the items that are related to it. And then Python combines those into one object for us to send it back out. So we don't have to go back out to the database ever again, right? We're just dealing with two queries. Select related works on foreign keys, not reverse foreign keys. It does the exact same thing, but does it all in SQL, not in Python. So it's only one query. Now, talks doesn't exist yet. We haven't gotten to that. So hopefully this won't fail when I run it. But we'll be using those in a moment. So anyway, that's what prefetch related does. And then you notice in the get query set, we're... Sure. Yeah. So what prefetch related does is, okay, so this is actually probably a little bit easier to show in a minute, but I'll explain it anyway. So we have these two things that we can do in the ORM, prefetch related and select related. Okay? Select related is a little bit simpler, so let's talk about it first. If I have a foreign key on my model, right there, right? That's a foreign key. Okay? So if I pull up a talk list object, or a bunch of them, and I say select related user, then my SQL query will go and get all of the users that are related to all of my talk lists that are in my query set. And it's all done in SQL as one big query with some joins. Okay? This is great because it means when I access talklist.user, I don't go back to the database. I already have that data. That doesn't work for the other side of the relationship, the reverse foreign key. If I have a user and do select related lists, that makes no sense to Django and to Python and to Python and to SQL. So we do prefetch related. Prefetch related now will do two queries. It does one query to go and get all my users, and then since I said prefetch related talks or lists, it does another query to go and get all the lists that relate to all those users, and then Python merges those together into one object. So again, I don't have to go back to the database for each time, but I have to do this kind of big bit of work. If you're dealing with insanely large data sets, you probably want to avoid these unless you're going to go and start denormalizing tables and making smarter bits of data. But if you're dealing with average normal stuff, these can save you a lot of time as far as going back to the database, especially if that ends up being your bottleneck or one of your bottlenecks. Okay. So again, we have this view, and we didn't specify a template, so it's expecting a default location for a template, which is the same place, but instead of list, we say detail. It's so much easier just to use the default names because they all look alike, and it's so nice. All right, and then let's pull this in. All right. So I mentioned that list views always have object underscore list. Well, detail views always have object. And so we can always talk about object. That'll be my individual talk list that I'm on. Okay? Again, I can reference the name, whatever. So once we have talks, they're going to go in that little spot, but for now, we just have a note. And then we've given ourselves a URL back to all of the lists. Okay? So we already have the URL and all that stuff. So let's see if this works. So if I'm here, I really think that it should be like that. Okay. Sorry about that. Like I said, that might blow up, so it did. So we just comment that part out. We'll bring it in a moment. There we go. So here's my to attend list. And then if I go back to the lists, I wish I knew why that one wasn't working. Slug. Sorry to stop here for a moment, but we obviously need to have this working so that we can go look at stuff. The joys of doing live coding. Okay, so we can talk about debugging. All right, from talk stop models import talk list. I know I only have one, so I can do the dot first. Just grab me the first one. Haha. Must be mapping not set. Look at that. I've been doing Python for 6 years, and I put a freaking comma in instead of a colon. Some days. Hey, look, it works now. All right. So yeah, you can always go into the shell, bring in your model, and call stuff. See what works and doesn't work. There's a package called Django extensions that is actually really awesome, but only for 2 things. So I wish that it was smaller. But it has a thing called Shell Plus and a thing called Run Server Plus. Run Server Plus, if I get time, I'll show it later because it's amazing when you have errors. But the Shell Plus automatically imports all your models for you, which is really handy. I wish those were in their own package. But yeah. All right. So we have our URL. We have our detail view. We have our detail view template. But back over to our views here. You notice that we did effectively the same work twice, right? And we did it in 2 different ways. I overrode get query set twice, right? I did it in 2 different ways. That's kind of horrible if I have to come back and debug this in 6 months and figure out why it's not working right. I have to read these and remember what I was doing. So let's make ourselves a mix-in. That does this for us. Okay. Yeah, 2 blank lines. Okay, so this looks just like our get query set from down below, right? Not doing anything new. So let's add that in. And then take that out. And then add that in. And take that out. And now I still just get the one set of lists. So this is kind of one of the really nice things about doing class-based views is you can start giving yourself little mix-ins to save yourself from doing work over and over again. It's not something you're always going to need, something you're always going to use, but it's handy if you find yourself writing the same thing more than once, especially if you're writing it in more than one way to get the exact same effect. All right. So any questions on list views, detailed views, or overriding get query set? No, that's still not going to work just yet. We got to get some more views, and then we got to get another model in first, and then it'll work. Yes. Having this prefetch related, it's trying to prefetch a field called talks or an attribute called talks, which does not at this point exist. Oh, yeah, I had a typo in my URLs, in my models. So quargs is a dictionary. Yeah, and I put in a comma instead of a colon, making it a set instead of a dict. Maybe we shouldn't have two constructors that use the same symbol, just as an idea. All right. So, our favorite thing ever. Let's talk about more views. Now, of course, this is Python. So if I didn't want to have to prepend, I don't have to. If I didn't want to prepend all of these views with talk list, I could always make like a views module, and inside there have talklist.py and talks.py and dogs.cats.py, whatever, and have views inside each of those that's just named whatever I want, and import them to different places, right? But it's generally easier, especially with a demo, keeping everything in as few files as possible. But if you find it odd that I'm doing all this repetition on naming stuff, it's Python. Just move things around. Do it how you want to do it. All right. So again, we want a create view to be login required. You have to be logged in to do this, all right? And so create views and update views, both of these, by default, use the same template because they're generally rendering the same or very similar forms. So since I'm not going to mess with that tradition, I'm going to use the one single template. I want to be able to control what the headline is, which that's where this handy little set headline mixin comes in. I can programmatically tell it what headline to put on the page and then just print out that headline. So I can use one template for a couple of different purposes without having to have a bunch of if statements or whatever. And then it's going to be a create view because we're creating something. Who'da thunk? So we're just going to say create for the headline. And then we need to control what happens when the form is valid. So before we go too far, let's talk about what this line does. I'll scroll that up so it's easier to see. So we're assigning what the object is, and we're saying commit equals false. So in Django, whenever you save a form, a model form, it creates a model instance. Whenever you just call save, it automatically creates this thing in the database. Oh, there's another step involved, but that's not important right now. But if I say commit equals false, it doesn't actually write to the database. It just creates the new model instance in memory and holds on to it for me. So I can now modify it before I actually write it to the database, which is what I'm going to do. I make sure that the user that owns this item is the one that's currently logged in and requesting this page, right? And then I save it for real. And then we'll just do our super. Okay, so we don't have anything called forms. Oh no. And now we need to create our forms.py because that doesn't exist by default, okay? All right, so now let's look at the forms. Thankfully, forms are something we should be kind of familiar with by now. They're fairly straightforward. I'll copy and paste this in, and if there's anything we need to talk about. Indentation error. All right, whatever. I'll type it in. Okay. So we need to bring in forms from Django. We bring in form helper like before. bring in those things. We have to bring in our models because we're going to be creating model forms. And now let's make our talk list form, which is a model form. So Django has two ideas of forms. There are model forms and there are standard forms. Standard forms aren't anything until you define what fields they have, right? You have to specify everything that they have. Model forms, on the other hand, look at the model, introspect all the fields that are in the model, and figure out what the form field would be for that model field, and automatically create the form for you. You'll probably find yourself using model forms a lot more than you'll find yourself using standard forms, simply because generally you're making a form so it relates to a model. The order of fields? By default, it's in the same order that they are defined in the model. If you care what order the fields are in, there are ways to reorder the fields in your form. You can, from doing it inside Python with actually the fields argument, or with crispy forms defining how the fields are laid out, or even inside the HTML if you want to step through for field and form.fields and then print out fields, you know. Or you can do form.fields.name, form.fields.email, whatever, and put them into whatever order you want. So it kind of depends on how much work you want to do and where you want to do that work, but you can reorder them if you want to. That's a big part of why I like crispy forms, is it generally makes it a lot easier to rearrange forms and make things look like I want, because I don't have to go mess with HTML or whatever. I can just do it inside the Python. So this fields argument to class meta, this defines the fields that will show up on the form. So even though my talk list model contains user and name and slug, well, I don't want to show them user because the user has to be them, so why even show them that? The slug is going to be automatically populated, so why show them that? I only want to show them the name, so that's the one I'll specify. And then, of course, our usual init. And we're going to show the name. And then we're going to have our button holder, which holds our submit. And you know what? I've decided I don't care about it being blue, so I'm not going to bother with the CSS class. Oh. I should extend from forms, not models, since I'm dealing with a form. So, yeah. Okay, so there's our form that we said we would be showing inside of our view. All right? So now let's give ourselves a URL. All right. Nothing crazy there, right? What we've been doing the whole time. And talks, templates, talks, talk list, not create, sorry, form.html. This is the one that deviates. But the idea is that you're using the same template for both creating and for editing. So form.html instead of create or edit or whatever. Okay. We'll bring this in. Nothing crazy here. The only thing new is this headline that we didn't define anywhere, but that's what the set headline mixin does, is it gives us, inside of our context dictionary, a thing called headline that is set to whatever you set it as on the class or as whatever comes back from the set headline, or get headline, sorry, method. And so then we render out our form, right? So let's go check that one out. Actually, let's change that other template instead. So if we look at our list template, we have this create a new list link. So let's put the URL in. So it's talks:lists:create. All right. I can make a new list. So these are ones that I don't want to go to. All right. So if I go back to my lists, now I have two. I have to attend and to avoid. So talks to go to, talks not to go to. Yeah? Nothing crazy there? All right. Oh, I got to hurry up if we're going to do this whole thing today. Or, you guys just hang around and we don't let the next tutorial happen in this room. All right, let's make a new one here. Update view, because we want to be able to edit our talk lists. Right? And set headline again. Okay, so update views have a query set because we have to select the item that we're going to update, right? So since I know I have a talk list query set and I know that I need to restrict it to only be lists that belong to the current user, I can, once again, use my restrict to user mixin. And one of the cool things is I can put that mixin up at the top. It really doesn't matter in this case, but in other cases where you're building something like this, putting ones that restrict quickly access at the top means that you don't have to parse the rest of your stuff. So if I had one that checks to make sure the user's name is Bob, and I put that one as the top one, anybody who's not named Bob immediately gets kicked out instead of me checking to see if they're logged in, checking to see if they have a certain permission, setting the headline to something, doing a prefetch related on the query set, doing this, that, whatever, I'm immediately going to kick it out. So it's kind of a way to make it to where your views do a little bit less processing if they don't need to. In this case, since we're just doing the query set, it's really not going to matter until we get further in, but still, never hurts. And we're going to use that same form. We're just going to say update for the headline, and our model is the same. And the cool thing is we already have the template, we already have the form, now we have the view. All we have to do is give a URL, and we're done. Actually, let's copy this one. And instead of D, we'll say E for edit. Yeah? And we'll call that update. Okay. So now I've got this one, and let's change that to E, and now I can I can edit it, and we'll say best not to go to these talks. All right, changed our slug, and now we've got two different names. All right, update view is fairly straightforward. Let's add one more thing to our global template. Up here we have all this stuff where if the user is authenticated or not, we show this log out. Let's add a new one in here. Where's my text? There's my text. And let's say talk lists. So now I have a nice handy little button for going to my talk lists. All right, since that's my primary thing I'm doing. We could also create a delete view. But, I don't know, do you want me to create a delete view? Or should I just skip that one? I plan to skip it. It's something you guys can all build. It's easy enough to build. So let's go on to the next bit. Unless there's questions about create and update views. No? You can see how it's fairly easy to start building a CMS for yourself for whatever your project is fairly quickly. You can kind of just jump right into building out create views, update views, delete views, list views, all that kind of stuff for quickly building a CMS for something that's not the admin, because the admin's not for end users. It's only for you while you're building stuff. And you can give something nice looking to a client pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk about talks. So back in our models, we have this talk list model, which isn't super handy. Fold that up. So let's make our talk model. And first of all, there's only so many rooms here at PyCon where a talk can happen. So instead of having the user type in the room every single time, and us having to validate that it's a correct room, or just hoping they don't mistype it and then they go to 610 or something, which doesn't have talks in it, let's just give them choices. So when we give choices, we always have a two-tuple. The first value is what's stored in the database. The second value is what's displayed to the user. All right? So we have several rooms here at PyCon. I won't put all of them in just because that's needless, but we'll put in a few. That's enough. All right, so we're going to have 3 of these. So now, let's set up our other stuff. All right, so we have a foreign key back to talk lists with the related name of talks. Now we will be able to do our prefetch related once this model exists and everything. Okay? So a name and a slug, just like before. So you might be wondering why I do slug field instead of another character field, so another char field. The reason is because slug fields automatically have a database index applied to them. So long as you're looking up by slugs, it'll be faster than looking up by names or whatever. So it's nice being able to automatically have something indexed. Obviously, a talk happens at some point, so we need a when. So now we have this character field, which has a max length of 5, which happens to be the longest of all of our choices. And our choices are set as the room choices, which means that if anybody tries to give us a choice that is not in that list of choices, it will error and go, hey, that's not a valid choice. We can't save that one. All right, and then a talk is hosted by someone. Okay, so let's talk about ordering. Ordering is the default ordering. When I pull this query set out of the database, what order do I want these things back in? All right? By default, they come back in order of IDs, but maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to have whichever one's coming up next or comes up first to show up first. And then again, we're going to make sure that we don't have more than one talk with the same name on a talk list. Likely that just means you made a mistake, so we might as well stop you from making that mistake if we can help it. So that's just like before. All right. So any questions on this model? Anything here that doesn't make sense? Yes?
If you wanted the room choices for another table, you maybe split that out into another model.
If I wanted the room choices to be in another table? Yeah. I'd now have to have a room model and then do a foreign key to room and then you create rooms, and it would automatically update the choices based on the ones that are created. Yeah, choices like this is really only good for things that are static. Obviously, we're not going to suddenly sprout 20 more rooms at PyCon. We only have so many rooms, so it's going to always stay those rooms. So for the purposes of this, a static choice works perfectly. If this is something where maybe you're building a meeting organizer at work or something, and maybe there's however many meeting rooms, but some of them are always reserved or whatever, so they can't be put in, maybe then you have a model. If a room's been reserved, then it doesn't show up for whenever you create your new meeting, so you want to have the room as a model. All right. So we created a new model, which means we have to do a migration. Remember how I said you should make a shell alias for it? I made one a long time ago. That's SM, but it's Python manage.py schema migration, right? I just don't want to type it all out. So -- auto says basically look at the models, compare it to how it was, figure out what's different, and make the migration for that. And then we say this is for the Talks app. So we do that. It's going to create a new model called Talk, which has a unique constraint. And then I have M as a shell alias as well for just running the migrations. All right, so we ran the migrations. Now we have a Talk model as well. All right, we want to be able to create talks, right? So we need a form for that. So let's go back over to our forms. And let's make a talk form. And let's put in our fields. Now you notice these are in a different order from how they were in the model. So they will show up in my form. If I didn't define a form in Crispy Forms, they would now show up in this order instead of in the order they're defined in the model. Oh, it is. It's ween. Okay. Model equals models.talk. Wow, full of them today. You see what I mean about it'd be nice if there was some sort of mix-in that automatically did this for me? Maybe I should contribute that. Okay, and now we're going to add something new. So we have a method here called cleanWin. So Django does a whole bunch of different validations on forms. One of the nice things that it does is it runs each individual field through, if it exists, a custom validator for that field. So since we have named this method win at the end there, whenever the win field is validated, this method will be run to make sure that it matches the validation we want it to have. So we'll pull it out of the existing data. And then well, so by default there aren't fields for by default, there are not methods for each individual field. It looks to see if the field has any validators declared on it, which are a separate idea. And then it just checks to make sure that the value that's in the form matches what the model would logically expect. Like if it's an integer field, it makes sure that it's an integer, right? This is for me doing custom validation. And in this case, since we know when PyCon starts and we know when PyCon ends, sorry, not 13, ends on the 17th, right? Oh no, that's it. Okay. And yeah, I know we've got a bunch of red there. We're going to have stuff we have to bring in. So if not PyCon start less than when less than PyCon end. So if the date that I put in isn't between the starting and ending dates of PyCon, then I want to raise a validation error. When goes outside of PyCon. And if everything's cool, then I'm going to return when. So let's get these things imported that we need to import. We need to bring in date time, obviously. We need to bring in our validation error. And we need to bring in UTC. Django and Postgres are very time zone aware. So we want to make sure that we're comparing all of our date times and everything in the same time zone. So we're converting everything to UTC. And we're just checking to make sure that everything's good there. And then so long as it passes with everything being in the same time zone, then we know that our validation's good. Like 9 p.m. on the 17th? That's outside of PyCon. There aren't any talks at that point. PyCon ends at 5. You can go look at the schedule. All right. So we'll show how this when works in a moment. So what we want to do is we want to go back over to our views and this detail view. First of all, we can now turn that back on because we have that model, we have that relationship that exists. But we want to make it so that our detail view on the talk list has a form for adding a new talk to the list. Right? Makes sense. I'm already looking at the list. I might as well be able to add talks to the list. So I need to bring in one more thing here from Django. We're going to bring in redirect from Django's shortcuts. And then on this talk list detail view, I'm now going to actually specify a couple of things. Okay, so this is a detail view. It doesn't care what form class is. It has no idea of how to do a form class. I'm putting that there just so I have a common kind of language and API through all my views as I'm building stuff. But detail view itself cares nothing about form class. HTTP method names it does care about, though. This lists all of the method names that this view is allowed to respond to. So by default, detail view only responds to get. So if I post to it, it just renders the get. It doesn't do anything. Right? So I want it to be able to do different things based on how I access the view, whether through a get or through a post. So now we need to add some stuff. Okay, so get context data is a method that handles returning the context dictionary for the view. So if you're used to doing function-based views where you have template context that you're creating all the time, or you're passing a dictionary to render to response, that's what this method does. Context.update. All right, so we are updating the whatever context dictionary has come back with this new form object which is our form class instantiated with whatever's inside request.post, or nothing if there's nothing inside request.post. We're not going to actually use this for parsing the form. This is just for if the form generates any errors, we want to be able to send those errors back to the view and show them. Okay? If you've read 2 Scoops of Django, you'll know that doing the self.request.post or none is kind of a code smell anti-pattern thing. So that's why I mentioned we're not doing that for actually parsing the form. Okay, so we know that we're inside request, or we know we're inside post, so there has to be a post object inside the request. So we're going to instantiate the form based on that. Now it might be empty, in which case we're going to have a bunch of errors and that's going to get shown to the user, but we know that it's there. That's why we're not doing the or none. So if the form is valid, then we're going to call self.getObject to get the talk list, right? We're going to save the talk. Again, we're going to say commit equals false. The talk list on the talk is going to be the one that we just fetched. And then we're going to save it. Otherwise, we're going to return self.get. So we're effectively doing a redirect, but not really. And then this is kind of a cool thing about Django's redirect method. If you pass it a model object, it will look for getAbsoluteURL on that model object and call getAbsoluteURL. So you don't have to give it the whole URL. You can just say redirect to this thing. Okay. So the last thing we need to do on this is we need to actually show the form, right? Because we don't have the form yet, or we're not showing the form. So we're going to do that, and then over here we'll do something I'm going to copy and paste because I don't want to type all that HTML. All right. So we just got a thing over here that says add a new talk and shows the form. So let's go look at a talk list. Hey, there's my form over on the side. Oh, it's empty. All these things are required, and I didn't fill them in. All right. So let's find a talk we actually want to go to, or just whatever one pops up first. Talk schedule. All right, let's say this one's fun because it has crazy characters in it. All right, so I'm going to go to that one, and it's hosted by those people. This is the annoying part. I have to type it in. And that is at 10:50. And the room for that one is AB. How is that not a valid date time? Does it let me be American? Hey, it did. All right. I know it went through because I didn't get any errors. I know we're not showing any talks yet. So let's show talks. Actually, let's do one other thing first. So let's go back to our list view. And here's where we're printing out the list, the object. Yeah? So let's show a little thing in here. A little badge. Back to talks. All right, so my toAttend has one talk. See, there's a little one inside the badge. So that's kind of cool. But what's actually really annoying is that now every time that I render a list, I then have to go and do a new query to count all of the talks that belong to that list. So if I have 50 lists, I've just added 50 queries in the template, not in my view where I'm paying attention to my queries, or in the models or the forms. I'm doing it from the template where I'm likely to not catch it. There's actually an excellent package called Django Debug Toolbar, which I'm not going to install right now, but it's really great, and it will show you all of your SQL queries that are being rendered, whether they're from the view or the template or whatever. This is an excellent tool to be using, and it gives you a really great way of seeing where you can clean up your queries. We can talk more about it after the tutorial, but we're running low on time. So, all right, but let's fix that so it doesn't do that. Let's go back over to our views. And we have this list view up here, right? We're going to change that one. So up here from Django.db.models import count. Anybody want to guess what count does? If you said it counts things, you are right. Sadly, it doesn't do any nice laughter like the count, but talk list, list view, self, get, query set. Okay, so now I'm going to annotate my query set. And annotations are really awesome. Basically what I'm saying is that for everything that is in, that's in my query set, for every single record that's in the query set, I want you to add a new attribute to that thing. I want you to call it talk count, and I want you to make it be the value of the count of all the talks that relate to this. And this is all done entirely inside SQL, not inside Python. So it's going to be a lot faster than doing it in Python would be. So now if we go back over here to our list, we said talk count was our attribute. Refresh, we still get our talk count, we still get 1. And we've done 1 query now instead of doing 4. No, 3, yeah. 1 for the 2 sets of lists, or for the 2 lists, and then 1 each for each list to see how many talks it had. So we've turned 3 queries back into 1, which is nice. Okay, so now let's go show our talks, just so that we know that it's actually working. And here we have this talks go here thing. We're going to introduce a new tag. But I bet you can guess what it does. So for every talk that's inside of our list of talks, we want to render this template called _talk. Needs to be an M in there. All right. So let's look at this template. There's a decent amount of stuff in here, so I'm going to paste it in. Basically, all we're doing is we have a little close button, which will make do something later. Right now, it doesn't do anything. So we have that little thing there. We have an absolute URL to the talk, and we have, which that may blow up, so we'll change that in a minute if we have to. We print out the name, and then we print out when it is, just some kind of stuff like that. So let's go look at one of our lists. There we go. So there's our character encoding and Unicode in Python. And we can see it's April 11th at 10:50 a.m. in 517 AB, which I do believe is here. And it's going to be by Travis Fisher and Esther Nam. Okay. So we can create lists, we can update lists, we can add talks to lists. Question?
So noticing that forms, models, and views.py files tend to grow exponentially.
Uh-huh.
How do you organize that, split it into different files? Is there a good community accepting to do that?
So for splitting things out, when you've got 50 views and you want to put them into a bunch of different files, really we're not looking for a file specifically called views.py, because this is Python, right? We just want to import something called views. So you'll have a directory named views with an init.py inside of it, and then inside there, break out into as many files as you want. Maybe you have talk list views, talk views, dogs views, cats views, whatever, and then you can import them into your init.py so that you can still do views dot whatever, or you can go a step further and do views dot talk views dot create, right? So that kind of just comes down to how you and your team want to organize things. It also kind of depends. Lots of times it doesn't get that large, and if you've got code folding, which most editors do nowadays, they're not unwieldy. Especially if you start doing class-based views and break as many things out as you can into mix-ins, so that you're not having to type very similar code over and over and over again. Those are really, really great ways to compress your code as much as possible. But yeah, just make a folder with the views or models or forms or whatever. A lot of people will end up doing that if they start using something like Django REST framework. You'll start building like serializers as a folder, and then inside there you build out all your different serializers because you need them for different use cases. Okay. So, yeah, I think we can do one or two more things. All right, so let's talk about getting a talk off of a list. Right? I thought this was a cool talk, but now I've decided I don't want it on my list at all. I don't want to move it, I just don't want to hear it all. Right? So, nothing about Esther's talk. I'm sure it's an awesome talk, just I don't want to have it on there. So let's look at how we would do that. We're back in views.py. Woo! But this is our first view that actually responds to like a talk more than a list. But really we're talking about removing it from a list. So obviously I want them to have to have logged in. And as this is a redirect view, it doesn't care about model. It doesn't understand what model is at all. Redirect views just take a GET request, and then once that GET request is done, they issue a redirect to somewhere else. But again, we specify things like model, form, class, whatever, so that we have a very common vocabulary amongst all of our views. So to specify where to redirect to, and we're going to redirect to something called talk list, which we haven't defined yet. This view actually has a decent amount of stuff in it, so. But it's a good example of showing how you can do a lot of stuff with class-based views. Self.model.objects.get. I want the PK to be the one that's passed in. And I want the ID on the talk list to be the one that was passed in. And I want the user that owns the talk list to be the currently requesting user. Now, since I'm getting a talk model and not a talk list model, I can't use my restrict to owner mix-in, or restrict to user mix-in. Except but if that query, the model.objects.get, tells me that such a thing doesn't exist in the database, then I want to raise an HTTP 404. Otherwise, if it does exist, then I'm going to return the talk. I've also been using Python for years and just recently learned about the else clause on try excepts, and now I'm like, that's so awesome, I can use that everywhere. The things you learn when you start teaching. Okay, so now in the get, this is actually going to happen, right? So get object, self.getObject, and quargs.get PK, and quargs.get talklist PK. Okay, so those are going to come in on the URL. And then, since I don't want to, since I'm going to be deleting an item, and I don't want to lose access to the talk list, I'm going to stick it into a variable on the object. And then we're going to make a little message here. And then we'll delete the talk. And then we'll go ahead and redirect. So we need to bring in some stuff for this. So from and we need to bring in messages too. I don't care about the line. Okay. So since it's a redirect URL or redirect view, it's going to hit the view, do whatever's inside the get, and then send me to wherever I told it to redirect me to. Okay. This is one where we might want to specify that the redirect is permanent, because really it should show a 302, not a 301, because we wouldn't want them to come back to this view to try to delete the talk again. But it's not that important for right now. It'll just throw a 404 if they try to come back. All right. So now we need a new URL. And this one's a little bit more complicated than what we've done. So we're going to capture the talk lists PK. And then we're also going to capture the PK of the talk. Right? And that's going to go to views.talklist remove talk view. And we'll give it a name of remove talk. Okay. And then inside of our talk.html, where we have this close thing here, we put in our URL. So talks lists remove talk. And we want to give it object.talklistID and object.id. Oh. Why is there no reverse match for that? Oh, because it didn't get an argument for the first one. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I forgot that I'm on talk in here, not talk, or not object. There we go. Okay. So now I have this talk that's on there, but now I don't want to have the talk on there anymore. So I can remove it. And that's a problem with all right. So the message didn't show because it was already gone, but since I had Unicode in there, when I tried to print out the message with Unicode in it, and it's expecting only ASCII, woo, things blow up. All right, so let's see. We can add talks. We can remove talks. Let's do a schedule view, something that's actually kind of handy and fairly simple. Okay, so at the bottom of our views here, We're going to make a new one, talk list schedule view. Again, we want to restrict our query set. We want to prefetch some stuff. And it's a detail view. Now, we could have just extended our talk list detail view, but then we have the form processing functionality and stuff like that that's been defined already. So we have that inside of a view that doesn't need it. And since we don't really have to define all that much on this one, it's easier just to go ahead and rebuild it. Okay. Oh, sorry, that's not restrict to owner. That's restrict to user. Okay, so now we need to create that template. And again, this is one of the ones that has a lot of stuff in it. But there's nothing new here. There's nothing here that we haven't talked about before, except for, I take that back, this tag, regroup. So what regroup does is regroup takes a bunch of things, in our case a query set, and it regroups them by some attribute. And then it gives us a new object that contains two keys. The first key is called grouper, or rather it gives us a list of objects that contain two keys. The first key of each of those objects is called grouper, which is the thing that, everything was grouped together by. In this case, it'll be by the date that the talk happens on. The second one it gives us is list, which is a list of all the original items that were in the thing that we just regrouped. This works just like itertools' group by, if you've used group by inside itertools. Is that in itertools? Itertools or collections, one of those two. Part of the Python standard library. It works very similar to that, but this is inside the template. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to see a schedule. All right, so let's add a talk back to this list. Um, 04/11/2014/1050. And I think it was in room that one. We'll just say it was. All right. So now if I want to get to my schedule, so there's my schedule view. So this would be a little bit nicer for printing out or looking at on a phone or something like that, right? The idea is that since we're going to have multiple stuff. But let's go back. Let's put a talk on that happens on another day. I'll just make up a talk. How about that? Uh, 12/2014 at 10:50 in that room. And now if we go back to our schedule, we see that we have one set that's by this day and one set that's by this day. So that way we can start to divide things up nicely for ourselves, right? No matter how I put them all in, I want to separate it out and I want them to group by day. And I don't want to repeat the day over and over and over again, right? Like it would be silly to have it would be silly to say 2014-04-11 twice when all these things happen on that same day. I might as well just say it once. So since I've now regrouped it by that day, it's only going to show up once. Maybe you end up doing this for, I want to see all the things that are owned by this certain user, but I want to see everything for every user. Or maybe you want to regroup them by their status. Maybe some are pending, some are executed, whatever. All right, any questions on the removal view or any of that stuff? Yeah?
What were you doing when you were setting object attributes like self dot
Oh, Yeah, in the detail view, or sorry, not the detail, the removal view. So what I'm doing, all right. So if we look at these two lines, right, I'm getting an object out of the database, right? For the first line, when I call self.getObject, I'm fetching a talk out of the database, and then I'm going to delete that talk later on, right? So just in case I end up needing to call something about the talk list that the talk belongs to, after I've deleted the talk, that's why I stick it onto a variable on the class. All right. So in this case, I'm not, because I end up doing my messages and everything beforehand. Well, actually, no, I do, because it calls this get redirect URL, and so I need to have that talk list there to call the get redirect URL. I'm just holding on to it for safekeeping. No, what? Yeah. So once I delete the object, I can't refer to it anymore, right? Because it's been deleted, it doesn't exist. So if I try to go look up an attribute on it, it doesn't exist. It's not there anymore. So well, so when it actually gets to the point of doing this, so if I was to do this like that, right? By the time I get to that point, object no longer exists, so it can't go look up the talk list from the object, because object's been deleted, right? So object exists, yes, object is in my cache, right? But once I query off to .talklist, or as it would be in the actual model, talk list, then it goes back to the database at that point, and it can't find the talk list object. Well, if I put it as a class level or an object attribute, if I put it as an attribute, then I don't have to pass it. So if I end up needing it 5 different places, I don't have to pass it to 5 different functions. I know it's there, so I can just use it. Yeah, once this view is done rendering, that'll go away. None of everything that's tied to self is only tied to that view, so long as that view exists. So once the view finishes rendering and actually sends data back to the database or whatever, then that's done. All right. So I think that's actually all we're going to get to today, because I have to have you do a survey. Fun, right? But let me put that up real quick. I do have a couple other things to talk about before we get finished. So a couple of good resources. It's my thing, so I'm biased, but Getting Started with Django covers a lot of what I've talked about today. And then, of course, the PDF and other guide finish out what we were going to go over today. If you have not read it, this is an awesome book. Once you've done the polls tutorial and you've built something on your own, go get this book, because this book's amazing. Again, I have to admit some bias because I did technical editing on it, and it's by a couple of friends of mine. But it's a great book for talking about a lot of the common scenarios in Django and a lot of little problems that you'll encounter and how to solve them. It's not a tutorial, it's not a learning guide. It's a best practices guide. So once you understand Django to some degree, this will show you how to not make simple little mistakes, how to make things work better. I don't know if it is, but I'll put it in there if it's not. And then the other one is this horrible Kickstarter link. This is a friend of mine who's also giving a tutorial today. She's giving it in the afternoon session today. The talk is Django for Designers. So if you end up doing web design kind of stuff, or you come from a web design background and you're getting into Django, she's putting out a book soon called Hello Web App, which is all about that process. So if you want to back it, help her out, it's on there. If nothing else, watch the video. It's fun. You get to see a dog and hear her talk about mailing people boxes of fish. All right. If you can go to that URL, please, PyCon would like you to fill out a survey. And then if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. We still have 10 or so minutes left. Yes?
You mentioned really quick, why do you prefix things with an underscore?
That's kind of just a personal convention, but I've found that it tends to make a lot of sense for when I'm looking at a directory. So if I have these things that are global, like my layouts, and maybe I have a global partials directory too, right? Like it holds on to an authentication form that always gets rendered, or whatever my greeting is, or a place to show message, like you currently have 5 unread messages, right? If I prefix those with an underscore, the directories, in most operating systems and most editors, they're going to be at the top, which kind of makes sense because they're important, right? Or they're overarching. But really, it's just a personal convention. It's not something everyone in Django does. It's not something you have to do. It generally helps if you find little conventions like that you enjoy and stick to them. It'll make it easier for you to edit your own code. Yes? If I'm defining a model that has more than one foreign key to another model,
So for example, if I have something in
like maybe I have a blog post that has an author and an editor. They're both users. Something like that. Yeah, so you can define both of those. They both go to user, and as long as you give them different related names, it won't care. If you give it different field names, the blog post won't care, but the user model will still complain, saying that you have a conflict on the related name. So you can give it 2 different related names, so maybe written posts and edited posts, right? Or if you give one of them or both of them a related name of the plus symbol, the plus sign, then it will not do the reverse foreign key. Yeah, I find very few uses for the plus sign, but every once in a while it comes in really handy. And as far as I know, that's the only special character that acts that way. I don't believe any of the others, like if you put an asterisk or something, I don't believe that has the same behavior. Anybody else? Yes? I can hear you just barely. Using the ORM. Using the ORM outside of Django? I don't have any personal experience with doing that. I know that it is possible. As far as I understand it, the way that you'd have to do it is you would end up defining models for your legacy tables. You had to specify what the fields were. You can tell Django what database table name to use. I do believe you can even tell it what field name to use for individual fields. So as far as I understand it, you'd end up creating a Django system that represents your old one, but you'd tell it that it's that old database and you'd be able to do your queries. I haven't done that myself, but it seems like that should work pretty simply. Yeah. I'll try that at some point. I'll find a legacy database somewhere and try to build that. But yeah, that should work. Yes?
I'm not sure if you addressed this earlier, but I'm having trouble installing
Django-crispy-forms.
So
Under settings.py, am I supposed to put crispy underscore forms, or
Mm-hmm.
because when I get that, I get an error saying it's no module name crispy forms.
And did you pip install it?
I did.
Can you show me? Or just install it again. It won't matter.
Requirement already up to date.
That should work.
Does it go by a different name?
speech forms. If you do a pip -- freeze, or just pip freeze, that's it. Okay, but so you notice you did pip freeze and it doesn't list Django. So maybe you need to do pip 3. It looked like you had some Python 3 stuff. Yep. All right. Yes? Yeah. So URL patterns is kind of a magic variable. Django expects there to be a variable named URL patterns inside of your URL files, which contains all of the URL patterns that you wish to expose. Okay? So since I wanted to expose a list, if we'd gotten further, there would have been 2 sets of namespaced URLs. There would have been list patterns and talk patterns, which that's in the book. So continue reading through the book and you'll get to see how it works. So I define list patterns as a set of patterns, and then I namespace that inside of my URL patterns, which is what Django will load. So it's just a convenience pattern for me to have one called list and one called URL patterns, right? You don't have to do that, and you probably won't do that most of the time. But if you end up having an app that deals with, say, 2 or 3 models, several URLs for each model, but perhaps model URLs that you want to have the same name, right? Like maybe you're going to have a create pattern on both of these. Then it makes sense to divide them up and namespace them yourself so that you have just that nice bit of organization. None of that's required. It's just kind of a way to make it nicer to read through. Which, you know, when you come back in 6 months is really what matters. You want code that's easy to read, not code that makes you pull out your hair. If you think of any questions over the course of the week, find me. I'll be around, and feel free to grab me and ask me. So, yeah. Thank you. You're a wonderful class.
So the read the docs link, is that, you find out what's going on there?
No, I will double check it. I know the guy that runs Read the Docs, so if I can't. It is a text version of the PDF, so it's all HTML and linked and stuff.